Dr. Parakala, I want to talk to you about the tweets you have put out about the Election Commission's Maharashtra and Jharkhand turnout figures. Let's start with Maharashtra. I'll come to Jharkhand after that. At 5 p.m. on the 20th, the turnout in Maharashtra was deemed to be 58.22%. By 11:30 p.m. on the same day, it had increased to 65.02%. Before counting on the 23rd, it had gone up yet again to 66.05%. This means that the turnout increased by 7.83%. That's such an astonishing figure. I'm going to repeat it for the audience, that the turnout increased between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. by an astonishing 7.83%. That's such a huge increase in terms of the number of people. Can you start by estimating for me how many people that would actually be?
Karan, from 5 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. 5 p.m. there was a figure of 58.22. And 58.22, the gross number would be 5 crore 64 lakhs 88,024. By 11:30 p.m., that percentage has gone up to 65.02, which gross figure would be 6 crore 30 lakhs 85,732. Between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., the total hike in gross number is 65 lakhs 97,708. In other words, about 66 lakhs. But the hike doesn't end there. Just a few hours before the counting, again, there was an increase of 9 lakhs 99,359. That's almost about 10 lakhs. All put together, from 5 o'clock on the 20th to 11:30 p.m. on the 20th, and a few hours, 12 hours before counting, the total increase was 75 lakhs 97,067. That's about 76 lakhs.
That is such an astonishing figure that it bears underlining for the sake of the audience. What the Election Commission is asking us to believe is that between the formal close of polls at 5 p.m. on the 20th and the last voting that happened at 11:30 p.m. on the 20th night, an additional almost 76 lakh people voted. That is such a difficult figure for most people to believe. They would turn around and say it's unbelievable. Isn't it very hard to swallow?
Yes. If you look at the historical data, Karan, never ever we had, Election Commission announces a provisional figure at 5 o'clock. But then the final count is given a few hours later, because there may be people who are waiting on the premises and they're all allowed to vote. After that is also done, finally in the night, they give you the final figure. Historically, the discrepancy or the difference between the provisional figure and the final figure has never ever crossed 1%. It has always been under 1%. Now, today we are in a situation where between the provisional figure and the final figure, it is 7.83%. Gross figure is about 76 lakh votes.
Let's take up the point you made that after polls officially close at 5 p.m., if there are still people waiting on the premises or in the compound, they are permitted to vote because they arrived there before polls closed. Let's, for argument's sake, purely for argument's sake, assume that there were 1,000 people waiting in the compound to vote. Each of them arrived before 5 p.m., so each of them would have a right to vote. Now, let's assume that it takes 1 minute per person to vote. Actually, it takes a lot longer. It takes around 4 or 5 at least. But let's, for argument's sake, assume it takes 1 minute per person to vote. That means those 1,000 people waiting to vote would take 1,000 minutes to do so. And 1,000 minutes is 16.6 hours. But the problem is that between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., there's only 6.5 hours. So even in the 6.5 hours available for extra voting, that 1,000 simply could never have voted. And if the 1,000 could never have voted, how on earth could 76 lakh have done so? So my question is a simple one. How is this huge increase of nearly 8% to be accounted for? Does the Election Commission give any explanation, or are they silent?
Karan, there is one more impossibility here. A booth across India, on an average, has about 1,000 and 1,200 votes, between 1,000 and 1,200 votes. If after polls closed, if 1,000 people voted, as you said, 16 hours it takes, if that is the case, does it mean that throughout the day nobody voted? But the Election Commission says that 58.22% have voted. That's one. The second thing is the Election Commission's own manual says that people who have entered the premises, and the doors will have to be closed, the gate will have to be closed, and the last person waiting will be given a slip bearing number 1. And the closest person to the booth is given the last number, so that there are no more additions after the gates are closed. Just to take it. And the whole process will have to be videographed, and all these slips will have to be deposited. Now, when people like us ask, where is the videograph? Election Commission doesn't say anything. Election Commission doesn't give you any explanation. Not only here, even during Lok Sabha elections, we found a lot of discrepancies, but no answer is forthcoming from the Election Commission.
You're making a very good point, Dr. Parakala. In addition to my point that it's almost impossible if there were 1,000 people waiting to vote for them to have voted, because there simply wasn't time for them to do so. But you're making an additional point on top of that, which is, if there were such a large number of people waiting to vote, it means that in many constituencies, people wouldn't have voted at all, because the constituencies simply do not have so many people to vote per booth. Both points vitiate the claim that 7.83% voted after the polls closed at 5 o'clock and before 11:30 p.m. Let's now come to your tweet about Jharkhand. There were 2 phases of polling in that state. In phase 1 at 5 p.m., the turnout was 64.86%. By 11:30 p.m., it had increased to 66.48%, which is just a 1.79% increase, and very, very different to the 8% increase in Maharashtra. In phase 2, the turnout at 5 p.m. was 67.59%. By 11:30 p.m., that had become 68.45%. That's an increase of only 0.86%, and again, hugely different to the nearly 8% increase in Maharashtra. So the first question I want to ask you is, how come the turnout didn't increase in Jharkhand after polls closed the way it did in Maharashtra? Doesn't that require an explanation?
Yeah, it does. It does. And if you want, again, like the Maharashtra, if you want the gross figures, I can give you the gross figures also. At 5 p.m., let's talk about the phase 1. At 5 p.m., the gross voting was 88,92,771. And the 11:30 announcement, after the provisional announcement, it was 91,14,885. It's about 1.62, as you said. And even this is also slightly more, because it's more than 1%. It's more than 1.5%. But historically speaking, it's never crossed. I think it's very unusual to cross 1%.
What is therefore the total gross figure of people that 1.79% represents of poll 1 in Jharkhand?
The hike was 2,22,114.
Very interesting. The hike for polling day 1 in Jharkhand was 2,29,000. The hike in Maharashtra was 76 lakhs. It's a vast differential between the two. And I might add, the hike for polling day 2 in Jharkhand, where the difference was only 0.86%, would be way below 2 lakhs. And therefore, the margin of difference with Maharashtra would be considerably greater.
You see, for phase two, the gross hike of voting and the discrepancy is just about 1,06,560. And that translates into 0.86%. Now, look at what happened in Maharashtra and what happened in Jharkhand.
Absolutely, which is why I say to you, doesn't it require an explanation?
It does require an explanation. It requires a scrutiny. It requires that the election commission will have to come clean on this.
And so far, they've said nothing.
No point in
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.